I won't get into details, but a dad yelling at a child that's 4 years old and seeing the trauma right there in the child. And for me, with the kids, the yelling aspect is, and it's hard for dads. Hey, we are not perfect. The yelling aspect, and I've seen the impacts of yelling not working. Hey, what is up, everybody? It's Ed Gough Jr. from Dad Central and the Dad Central Show. And I'm speaking with
Drew Soleyn of the Dad Central Show. How are you today, Ed?
I am outstanding. It's been a really good week. Well, the temperature is reduced from what it was we were getting some July in October where we live in our part of the world. But now the reality is hit and the leaves are beginning to fall and the rakes are coming out and all those sort of things.
Yeah, I've enjoyed September. It's been beautiful. But as we get ready for fall to actually be here, and this is actually when we're recording just before Thanksgiving here in Canada. So yes. Appropriate time to be grateful for what we did have in the month of September.
Absolutely. So what I was thinking, like Drew and I said, okay, well, we don't have a scheduled guest. We said, let's have a conversation on something. So Drew says, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? So I said, oh, you know what? This broadcast is brought to you by Dove Men Plus Care, or this show is brought to you by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. Okay, now we can get back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, so because in still a lot of homes and areas, Thanksgiving is a tradition, I thought I shouted out to Drew and saying, why don't we talk about some traditions or some roles that our parents played when it comes to raising kids in dads' lives? Because on many of our conversations with dads, they tell us how much of an impact their dads, whether they were there or not there, have had on their fatherhood journey. So Drew said, okay, we can press the play button or record button and we can do something today. So Drew, let's talk about it. So how would you define a parental role model?
Well, before we do that, can I just talk briefly about the importance of traditions or celebrations and what they instill. Right? I think they help instill and transmit values. They help create memories, which I think are very powerful for kids. And I'm sure anyone who's listening, if you think back to some of your childhood experiences, the memories that stand out to you, many of them might revolve around this season, right? Whether it be Thanksgiving, whether it be Christmases, whether it be, depending on your faith, it could be an Easter time, or maybe it's Halloween. Those are things that recur over and over. And whether you realize it or not, I think there's a lot of things that they put within children as they grow, but also create a lot of meaning for us as adults. So I think that point that you were making at the beginning is really important in terms of recognizing, there's value in this area, and this time of Thanksgiving and gratitude, I think is very important too. Not to get too far from the topic, but so I think the value of or defining a role model is someone who can help give you an example to follow, right? A role model is someone who you look to as a way that you want to be, or has a skill that you want to, a word you like, emulate. Those to me is what a role model is. Someone who you look to follow and to maybe have the similar types of contributions. How would you define role model?
And there's a lot for me to unpack on what you shared there. And it's interesting because we're talking about role models. And of course, many years ago, Charles Barkley said, we as athletes, we're not role models. And I think even today with the disruptive climate that we're living in these days, the whole aspect of role model. But for me, I just would add on what you shared, that a role model can show you good and bad.
Mm.
Right? So when we talk about role models, they can show us things that we want to do, but also they can show us things we're not supposed to, or we shouldn't do. So everyone has, I'm going to use a gentleman you love dearly. Everyone has influence. So you know who I'm talking about there.
Of course, John
Okay. Right. So everybody has influence. So when you talk about role model, when it comes to parenting, and I know we'll get into this later on in the conversation, there are role models that, well, dads that have been on our platform have said, or on show have said, that they weren't my biological father, but they had an impact on me in the parenting I'm doing today. So I think a parental role model can be so many different people just outside, if there's a dad in the house. And a parental role model can be if you grew up in a family where there was only a mother or only a dad. And hey, maybe they have as a popular word, a partner with them. That can be it. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. But I just want to add that a role model can be a role model that can show you good, but also can show you bad.
Yeah, things. I think that makes a lot of sense. And why that's important, because I think when we go through those experiences and we're looking to that person, good, or we're learning from the bad, it really does influence how we parent, or how we interact, or how we work. So I think the value or importance of a role model is because it really does help shape how you do whatever it is that you do. And that's why they talk about, in those years, 0 to 6 years, they're so important, because you're laying down the foundation for what a child is going to experience as they grow and develop. And so to me, that's the power and importance, why it matters so much that we have, I'm going to say, healthy, positive, real role models that provide influence. And I think for me, the distinction is, parents are obviously role models for our children, Absolutely. Good, better, or ugly. But as parents, do we think about who have been the role models for us and how are they influencing us? And I guess it's a virtuous or potentially destructive cycle, but it's about being able to recognize that, because parents have such tremendous influence on children, and as dads, we have such powerful influence on the development of our children. And many, I think, in this generation, our generation, may have not had the parental role model that they've wanted. And we've heard stories from guests on our show of, it's kind of painful. They don't really want to go back to it, or they reference that, it just didn't really give them what they're looking for, and they're very passionate about changing and doing things differently. So I think there's this idea that you could have no role model that you want to follow, which is maybe that negative you're referring to. You could have had a really bad role model who really was painful and hard in terms of your particular parent, or you could have had a good role model in your parent or others. So those are some things that I think why role models really matter.
I'm going to add something to this, and people think this may be a little bit controversial, but I'm on this platform with Drew, so I'm going to say it, that when I watch people these days and watch their actions, I will sometimes ask, what was the relationship with the dad, whether they had one or not? That is a lot to me. One of my mentors from many years ago, and I got to reach out to him, he said that kids, replicate what they emulate, what's been emulated to them. So what's been emulated to them, they'll replicate many a time. And when you said about the 0 to 6 years old, I don't know how many parents realize, I don't know how many, especially dads, realize how important that environment from 0 to 6 years old is to the future.
Yeah, that's an important point. And it's also challenging if you are a new parent for the first time and you haven't had that role model, or you had a bad role model, because you're essentially learning as you go. And that can be hard for some people who are finding it really challenging. It can, you can be filled with self-doubt, shame, regret, a lot of pain, or maybe you are so passionate about doing things differently that you've just worked really hard and you committed. But sometimes I think dads in particular get pushed away. They get they're not included as much.
Yeah.
We talk about this idea that just before we came on the show, we were talking about trying to communicate the value and importance of fathers isn't always well received.
No, it isn't.
And especially when our focus is on the support of healthy child development. It's not about the dad. It's not about mom. It's actually about the child and what a child needs to grow into the best version, healthiest version of themselves into adulthood. And that really comes from having two positively involved parents, mom and dad. And that might even be controversial there. But the reality is that parents, mom and dad, when you look at the research, makes a significant difference for the child as they grow up. Now, does that mean that a child who doesn't have, a mom and a dad, they're set up for failure? No, because it's about relationship. It's about the influence. I had a single mom, for quite a few years. Yes, I was blessed to have a stepdad come into my life and be a tremendously positive influence. But, it is important that, dads recognize the value of their involvement at that early stage. And that can be supported, but it's also, it needs to be acknowledged that it's very challenging, the transition. And so having role models to look up to, or role models who you gain value and support from in that time period is crucial. And so for me, I was very fortunate. I found John Maxwell actually in 2011, before I became a dad. In 2013 is when I became a dad, and I had already started to begin applying it. So I view John Maxwell as a very powerful fatherly influence, even though the principles he was teaching were not about fatherhood per se. They were leadership, self-development, self-growth. And I think that's one of the foundations of being able to be a good role model for your child, is to continually grow and develop yourself and model that consistently for them. And so what he modeled for me is something that was important for me, even though it wasn't my dad or my stepdad. But they both modeled different things that have been valuable for me, even though there's been some things that aren't maybe ideal that I choose. So I know I'm going off a little bit, but I just think it's so important that we're conscious and aware of where are we getting our role modeling and how is that influencing what we're doing and how we're showing up as parents.
And we want to not forget in the conversation here that whoever is listening to this, especially if you're a dad, you may have had a good role model, you may have had a bad role model, or you may not have had any role model. So we're not making assumptions that there's lots of different nuances, and it brings to a longer conversation than we're going to have today. But definitely there are some who had good, some who had not so good, and some didn't have any. So we just want to acknowledge that and recognize that and as you were sharing about John Maxwell, there's so many different examples that have just come up in my alleged mind about when it comes to parenting. Like, of course, my dad was fantastic. And again, we didn't always run the race together when it came to parenting, but I realize now our value as we go on. But another gentleman I want to highlight, and he's transitioned earlier on when I had hair. People, if you can't see this, I don't have hair anymore. But when I did have hair, I spent 2 years working as a teacher's assistant in a public school. And probably it was one of the greatest work experience I ever had. And there was a principal there named Peter Chown, amazing individual. So he was principal at this school and was lots of different cultures. This is going way back. And he was like a parent to everybody. To the teaching staff, he had left another school. Half the teachers came with him. So that's one level of parenting. Next level of parenting with parents. And then another level of parenting with all the different kids that he dealt with. He was like a big dad. And he never yelled at anybody.
It's funny because you just said that. When you said he was like a big dad, I believe whoever's listening will have their own frame of reference. They might not have thought of that. They might have thought of a big dad controlling everyone, telling everyone what to do, and
No.
yelling to keep things in line.
No.
So my question to you might be, what did Peter Chown do that made that experience so powerful for you?
How he was able to different, and I almost think that he was everyone underneath him was a kid, to be honest, because he was the leader of the school.
People could interpret that differently and be like, well, I don't know about that. If he's treating me as an adult like a kid, why would I be
No.
No,
what I meant that he was in charge of an organization, so the buck stopped with him, but he treated everyone the same with fairness. If people are upset, he never yelled. He listened. He was a great proponent of the 80-20 rule. When people came to him, they did 80% of the talking. He only did 20% of the talking. And he was genuine. If he made a mistake, he'd be upfront with it. And he had so much, he garnered respect by not only what he said, but what he did and who he was.
So he walked the talk.
He
didn't just talk the talk, he walked it. And so
absolutely,
what you're saying is he modeled the type of behavior that he wanted to see from others. He
absolutely
gave grace. He owned his mistakes if he made them. He took responsibility for his actions. He communicated positively. He listened. But okay. So those are really foundational.
Yeah,
important things.
Yeah,
but not complex.
No,
right?
And his name just came on mind, and like again, he was one of those people that, like, yes, I wasn't a kid, but I felt like he was a dad to me, and I said, you know what, I can learn that not only in my own walk of life, but in so many different areas and different situations. And he walked his truth and he spoke his truth. Can I put it that way?
How would people describe him to you, or how would people talk about him?
Oh, he's you could speak to him about anything, or you almost like you could when you were chatting with him, you felt like you were sitting at a park bench in the middle of spring or summer, and not judgmental, and just handle things in the moment. That was great. And and it's interesting, the way I was raised was a little bit different than that. Right? It was another form. And I'll say it was like parenting. People treated him like he was dad. No matter what age that was communicating with him, he was like a dad, And that was really, really good. I learned so much from him.
I think this is important. It's just coming up for me, so I'm going to put it out there. When you say he was like a dad, there's something inside of me that says, or almost resists that idea, or thinks that, well, what if I didn't have, like, you had a real positive experience growing up with your dad.
Yeah.
What if, if I'm listening and I didn't have a good relationship with my dad growing up, and the word dad comes up, I kind of feel like my heart starts to race and I get more agitated and more like dad was, not a great dad, or dad wasn't present, or dad hurt me a lot. So I just want to be mindful of, I think there's an element here of he was like a dad who built trust and showed love and caring and concern.
He also did that with his own family too. So
which may not be the experience of everyone else. And so being mindful of, this is my default and bias. It's about a healthy relationship. And it sounds like what stood out to you is how you watched him relate to others who are all very different. They're at different ages, they're different stages. So really what he was displaying or role modeling for you was how to relate to people in a positive, what sounds to me, healthy way. Yeah. He was, you're talking about, he never yelled. Well, we know from research the impact that yelling has on kids. It's so
Absolutely.
detrimental. And we think about just being at work and you make a mistake and your boss comes and he chews you out in public, he docks your pay and he says you better show up on time and not make these mistakes again. Who leaves feeling positive from that interaction versus if the boss says, sounds like you had a hard hard day or it's rough. Hey, come back tomorrow. We'll go get him. It'll be all right.
Yeah.
We got you. You feel probably very differently. And think about children.
Absolutely.
When we yell at children, it's like we're boss number one. When we simply respond in positive ways, even if they make mistakes, we're more like boss number two. And how do they feel? And so we know. So I'm not going down the path because we're not talking about it today, but it was very relevant because we did in our Dad Mentor community last night, we had a master class on peaceful parenting by Sarah Rosensweet, and it was fantastic. And those principles there, but it really does relate to what you're describing as far as, are we as dads, or are we looking to role models who build positive, healthy, trusting relationships? I would imagine you could feel comfortable going to Peter and saying, hey, I've got this challenge issue.
Absolutely.
What do you think? Can you give me some advice or talk to me? So he's developed that relationship with you where there's trust.
Just so one thing more to add about Peter. Well, my dad was a teacher for 38 years in the same public school as Peter was in for a number of time. And my dad has what I speak about Peter Chown, my dad does. So even before I encountered Peter Chown, my dad would tell you the same thing. If we brought him on the screen right now, he'd have so many wonderful things. So he was just a caring, non-gentle. As I say a lot of times, he provided that safe and brave space for people. And again, my dad was a little bit opposite growing up with him, but now he's transitioned to that now, and he's learned along the way in regards to that, and that's what I take from him. But that's an example of mine that I've never forgotten him. Never forgotten him. He molded a lot of, not say a lot, but some of what I am today. And when I hear people that sound like a Peter Chown, it's alignment immediately. And I think, and for me with the kids, the yelling aspect is, and it's hard for dads. Hey, we are not perfect. The yelling aspect, and I've seen when the impacts of yelling not working as young as, I won't get into details, but a dad yelling at a child that's 4 years old and seeing the trauma right there in the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we won't get into it, but we've got resources. So if you go on our website, we've got
there we go. Good segue.
7-step guide to calmer, more peaceful parenting. And so it's free download. Just go to the website. It is, if you find yourself yelling and it's something you'd like to change, or at least grow through, that guide is there. It's fantastic, very simple, very practical, very doable resource. But it's one of the things that you can do to help both yourself and your children as far as the relationships go.
Are you a dad who feels like you're juggling a million things at once? Balancing work, family, and personal goals can be overwhelming. But what if there was a solution? That's why we created our new fatherhood community called Dad Mentor. For over 20 years, Dad Central has built practical tools to help dads. We understand the challenges you face and provide the support you need to thrive. The biggest complaint we hear from dads is there's no dedicated support for their specific needs. But not anymore. Our new community, called Dad Mentor, is here to transform your fatherhood experience. Imagine feeling in control, staying calm and patient when your children misbehave. Picture yourself connected to your children, guiding them with confidence and watching them succeed. When you join Dad Mentor, you'll have access to a community of like-minded dads committed to their dad journey, just like you. You'll also get the Dad's Roadmap. This is a step-by-step plan to help you go from unsure to unstoppable as a dad. Monthly masterclasses and Q&A sessions. You'll get answers and know exactly what to do straight from experts. Monthly group meetups that connect dads over common topics. A dad's resource library. Curated webinars, podcasts, or guides built by Dad Central to help you grow as a parent. And finally, you'll also get exclusive members-only offers and events. Now, many dads do try to do this father thing alone, only to find themselves trapped in frustration and strained relationships. Then they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or other distractions, leaving their family and their own well-being at risk. We don't want you to reach that point of regret. Take steps to invest in you and your family today. Join Dad Mentor and go from stressed, tired, and overwhelmed to confident, calm, and connected. Join us today by going to dadcentral.ca/dads.
A role model that I had that at first maybe you wouldn't think of this was my coach, Larry Haler. Because in reflecting on role models that I've had and how I've applied this, Larry had a very simple line: "You got to finish." From the snap of the ball to the whistle is when you're on. And if you stop yourself short before the whistle, you're not finishing. So it's a very crucial thing, but I take that into life, and there's been many other lessons I wrote about it. I wrote a 6-part series on LinkedIn, lessons from my mentor, and some of the things that I took from Larry really actually influenced a lot of my parenting, but only upon reflection. It was because he built such strong principles into me, and I've really incorporated, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Like they've become part of me.
Yeah,
and I recognize that that's have been a strong
inherited. Inherited?
No, not inherited. Integrated, maybe. Anyways, it's not even the word. Assimilated. There you go.
Okay, got it.
There's a way too complex word for just saying I took the good stuff and I started to apply it. So he's been a tremendous role model, but he was relational, but at the time I didn't feel that. I actually, said this in talking with people. I think Larry's more of a salesperson but what I realized he was applying was healthy boundaries. When I was playing, he had a son who was on the team, and it was interesting to see how he navigated that situation. And it was interesting how he had 2 other children. So he had a family, he had a wife. And so can you imagine 95 plus young men, highly influential? He established really healthy boundaries. But for me at the time, I felt those boundaries prevented getting maybe a little more relational. But I think that was an important thing that I took away from him in establishing healthy boundaries, establishing goals, working hard and disciplining and finishing. And so those actually really influenced my parenting a lot, because there's sometimes when I see my children maybe giving up, or I see my children, having difficulty in certain moments and not trying and giving their actual best effort, that those go against the things that I have been ingrained in me and I feel are very important principles for them. So it actually influences my parenting from that perspective. Sometimes good, other times I need to realize what is the age and stage and what's more important at this point in time. Is it empathy and connection and building the relationship, or is it challenge and confronting and pushing them to be all that they can be? So I think as my children grow, I can get more into some of those important lessons. And I have learned the value of relating and connecting with them first, like your role model, Peter Chan. But I think there's benefit in both, and I see how they have influenced my parenting. So it's been an important role model for me. So I think my point in sharing that and having this conversation is that role models can come from many different places,
Absolutely.
whether we realize it or not. But
Yep.
There's value in, if you don't feel like you have some of those role models, in getting more intentional about seeking them out. And they don't have to be necessarily right in your life. So John Maxwell, I've never met John Maxwell, but I've read his books. I've listened to his talks. I'm now part of the Maxwell Leadership Organization, certified in coaching and delivering his leadership content. So he's had a tremendous influence from that perspective. So they can be anywhere. It's all about your as a parent, as a dad, taking the action to find those role models and take what's valuable for you and what's working for you and begin applying it.
Makes sense. I know we're winding down, but I think there's a part 2 of this conversation where I want to go into a deeper dive and maybe look at some of the areas when it comes to fatherhood role modeling that I'd like to get into, because a number of ideas have come up in my alleged mind that I'd like to do a deeper dive in regards to this conversation. But, for my closing thoughts in regards to role models, like Drew said, every person around you is going to be a positive or negative role model. Even if you meet them for 2 or 3 minutes, they can potentially have influence on you. If you don't have the right role models, especially if you're a dad, seek them out, or even, reach out. And they don't necessarily have to be relatives. They don't have to be relatives. There is a lot of information out there, but as I say, when it comes to things like this, make a decision and take action, because when you do, it's not only going to help you as a dad, but it's going to help your child, your children, your family, and generations to come in your family. So, we have resources here at Dad Central that can help you with that journey. So I think that it's an important thing. So in Canada, you're celebrating Thanksgiving. I know in the States it's in November, but think about it's a very serious subject, because it's not just in you, it's going to go through you. The modeling you're getting and the modeling you are showing.
You are, as a parent or as a dad, your child's first and most important role model. So remember the power that you have to influence them for the rest of their lives. And
I just want to include too, this includes caregivers also. So when we say dad, there can also be male caregivers also. So we're not leaving out. So just want to put that part in also before we shut it down.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening, our challenge to you is, how can you be more intentional? Or maybe a more focused question is, what's the first step you could take to have stronger role models in your life and begin applying the lessons that you're learning to be a role model for your children? So as always, we're grateful for your engagement with us. We want to continue to offer value through the guests, through the conversations that we have. And if you are finding value, it would be really helpful for us if you could just spread the word. Share the show with others. Let them know that you're getting some value. If you're on any of the platforms, please like and or subscribe. Apple Podcast review would be fantastic. Let us know that we're still offering value for you. So thanks so much. We want to remind you that at Dad Central, we've got a lot of resources to help you. First and foremost, more of our shows. You can, this is if you want to reach out to us.
Yes.
Please email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. We can take guest suggestions, and we just want to hear more from you. Also, if you wanted to hear recordings of the show, you can do so at dadcentral.ca/podcast. You can also go to our website, dadcentral.ca, where we have, as mentioned in the episode, free resources. Our 7-step guide to calmer, more peaceful parenting is on the website. We have a free fatherhood masterclass. We have our dad mentor community. So lots of opportunities for you to get connected and get the resources that support you. So as always, we want to remind you that the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And I'm going to turn over to Ed, because he always finishes off in style. So Ed,
all right. Want to thank everyone who's watching this, listening to this live or on replay. And as always, want to make sure that don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourselves grace. And we will see you soon. Be well and keep the faith.